Hello and welcome to another episode of the CG Garage. This is episode number 452, featuring Joaquim Dos Santos, who is director of Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse. Amazing to have this guy on. Super, super nice guy. I met him at the View conference and we were able to do a recording of the podcast while we were there in Turin, Italy. Great conference, great speakers, and we have several more podcasts coming out from that event. He's an amazing guy, originally from Portugal, moved to Los Angeles when he was 4, comes from some humble beginnings, but it was really not necessarily a great student, as he said himself, but he was really into art and drawing and comic books and really got into that. And eventually that led him to storyboarding, and which is going to be an important theme. I think you guys need to remember that. But he did some incredible stuff. He's worked on some incredible films, especially during sort of the golden age of episodic animation. He worked on the episodic version of Avatar: The Last Airbender. He worked on The Legend of Korra and Voltron: Legendary Defender. Really great stuff, and eventually led him to do Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse. Really great stuff that he did. Now, you may want to actually go back and listen to the Peter Ramsey episode that I did back in 2019. It was episode number 249. And he was the director of Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse. And he also came from a storyboarding background. So you'll notice that storyboarding is actually kind of an important thing. And we've done several people who actually started with storyboarding in their background, including Ryan Woodward, not Ryan Reynolds, Ryan Woodward, really nice guy also. So storyboarding is a great way for you to get into directing and to understanding directing, especially if you have a passion for animation. And I think it's an important career choice that these guys have made that have led to great things. And so something to consider if you're sort of beginning your career as well. Okay, I don't have many announcements because we are kind of winding down right now, and it is in the United States. It is Thanksgiving week, so there's not much going on. But I do want to actually have a couple of announcements I'd like to ask you to listen to about the podcast specifically. So we're just over 450 episodes, and we're just recently passed 9 years on the podcast, which is super exciting. But more specifically, what this means is that next year it's going to be 10 years and 500 episodes. And I'd like to do something kind of special. I have several ideas, but I would love to hear from you guys. If you guys have any ideas, are there guests that you'd like to have on? Or are there some really great guests that we've had in the past that maybe we should bring back? Or is there an event that we should do this at? Should we do something live? Any ideas or would be great for you guys to just throw them out there. And if you do have any ideas, please let us know. Go to labs@chaos.com. Again, that is labs@chaos.com for our email. And just go ahead and let us know who you'd like to have on. And we've had many, many amazing guests in the past. If you're new to this podcast, an incredible lineup. Several Oscar winners have been on, and great directors, including people like Joaquim, but are really great guests. So definitely look at our roster of people who've been on in the past, and we'd love to invite some new people on, or invite some of the old people and see what has gone on in their career since then. So just give us some ideas. Again, that is labs@chaos.com. Now, if you guys want to know more about the podcast in general, just go to chaos.com/CG Garage. And of course, if you want to watch these podcasts, just go to youtube.com/Chaos Group TV. That's where we put all our videos, including the podcast. All right. But for now, please enjoy episode number 452 with Joaquim Dos Santos.
Welcome to another CG Garage, where the Chaos Group talks. You'll know it's over when the last bucket drops. We're gonna fire off rays in high dynamic range. We know that ambient occlusion is passé. Global illumination won't lead you astray. And while image-based lighting is really swell, you need to make sure everything has Fresnel.
Thanks for doing this. I appreciate you being on, and it was amazing to see your work and the things you've done. One of the things I always like to start off with the podcast is, what is your origin story? Like, where did it all start?
Wow. Okay, so it's sort of a three-pronged attack here. I was born in Lisbon, Portugal, moved to the States when I was 4. When I was a kid, my family, like the family crests, every family has sort of a crest in Portugal. And our family crest was a spider. So my middle name's Aranya, which means spider in Portuguese. And literally the first memory that I have is being in my room in Portugal and there being a Spider-Man poster on the wall. So it was sort of like just in my eyeballs since I can remember.
Wow.
Yeah. And then moved to the States when I was 4, spent all my summers back in Portugal. And it was, it was a bit of a latchkey kid. So I'd come home, watch animation, watch TV shows, make myself food, read comic books. It's, pretty standard stuff.
Right.
VHS was just becoming affordable, so I got a VCR. I would rent, movies nightly we had a little local video store called For You Video.
For You, okay, yeah.
For You Video.
And it was just one of those local...
It was just a mom and pop little place. I rented Buckaroo Banzai so many times that I was like, dude, just keep it. Like, you're going to pay more than this thing is worth.
Wow.
Yeah. And so, yeah, I just grew up with those passions, and it was sort of unavoidable. I was in LA, so I had access to like...
So you moved to LA from Portugal?
Yes, the way it worked was my mom was from North Hollywood.
Oh.
She moved to Portugal and lived there for 13 years and had a whole life there.
Okay.
Had me with my dad. They moved back to the States when I was 4, split up. So then I was with my mom most of the year, and then back in Portugal for the summers.
Right.
But she was like, "Hey, there's an animation union down the street. Like, you should go take classes there." And I was like a teenager at the time. I was like, "I'm not going to go take classes. I'm gonna figure it out." And I was the world's worst student.
Were you? But were you passionate about animation?
Every day.
All right.
It was sort of animation, comic books, movies, and it was that Venn diagram of things.
Sure.
So I'd go to San Diego Comic-Con every year and wait in all the portfolio lines to make it work. Never panned out for me.
Right.
But then, I had really no plan after high school other than drawing. And then we were working at a coffee shop. My buddy said, "Hey, I saw that there's like a little animation school," and he liked to draw too. So it was all the artists that worked at all the studios locally. Mm-hmm. And at night, they basically formed a non-accredited little animation school. So we started taking classes there. And as soon as I found storyboarding, this is like the perfect combination of all the things.
Right.
This filmmaking, sort of panel to panel work. It's sort of, a lot of it was, Batman the Animated Series was really popular at the time.
Right.
So,
what was the school's name?
It was called Associates in Art. It was in Sherman Oaks.
It's in Sherman. Okay, not far from North Hollywood.
No, right down the street.
Right.
And yeah, as soon as I started taking those classes, I knew, I became absolutely obsessed.
Right.
And then I had a local comic book store that I go to every Wednesday. And I was really good friends with the owner. It's DJ's Universal Comics. It's the best. It's still there. I still love shopping there.
Sure.
And I did a sketch in a sketchbook there. And a day later, the owner, Kat, he called me up. He called me up at the Coffee Bean. That's where I was working.
Oh, wait. Which Coffee Bean was it?
Do you know the Fashion Square? Sherman Oaks Fashion Square?
Yes.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
I was upstairs in Fashion Square.
Okay.
And he called me up and he said, "Hey, man, some guy from Sony just did a sketch in the sketchbook and saw your sketch. And was asking about you.
Wow.
Can I give him your number?" I said, "Yeah." And his name was Mike Chang. He was a director on Starship Troopers at the time. They were doing a TV series.
Right. This is the Roughnecks, right?
Roughnecks. Yeah. You're like the only person that was on that show.
Yeah.
And that was it. He basically said, "Hey, do you want to be a storyboard revisionist? Mm-hmm. Do you have anything that looks like a storyboard?" And I said, "I actually have a little portfolio that I've been working on."
Right.
And I got the gig. I think at the time I was making $6.50 an hour as a shift supervisor at the Coffee Bean in Tea Leaf. And he said, "We'll start you at $7.50. And I was like, "Get a hold of it. More to draw." And I got my first check, and it was for $750 for a week. I was like, "I think you guys made a mistake here."
Right.
They were like, "What are you talking about?" I was like, I think it was like $7.50 an hour.
Right.
They were like, "Dude, it's $7.50 a week." And that was more money than I had made ever.
Right.
And I couldn't believe it. There was toys in the studio, art on the wall, people of like mind, and I was making more money than I'd ever made in my life.
Wow.
It was like the greatest ever. And that was it. Once I got in, I just was determined to never, ever, ever allow anybody to give me a reason or give themselves a reason to not want me to be there.
Yeah, that's amazing. So you go from Coffee Bean to Sony as a big jump.
It was a big jump.
Big jump.
It was a big jump, but it was, animation, again, it's like us. It's like
right.
You kind of feel similar interests,
Yeah.
So it was all the stuff that I was doing with my friends anyways.
Right.
I was just now doing it in a professional space, quote unquote
right.
professional space. And we were all watching the same movies. We would all go pick up laser discs and all go pick up DVDs when they first came out. And I was just able to geek out with a different circle of humans.
Right. Right.
Awesome.
What was your what was your biggest inspiration at that point? Like from then on, like what really got you?
Growing up, the show that probably made the biggest impact.
Besides Buckaroo Banzai, which is pretty awesome.
That was up there. Was Robotech.
Robotech.
That show to me was like, I could watch it with my friends, and my friend had an older sister. She loved it for a completely different reason.
Sure.
She was watching the sort of soap opera of it.
Right.
And we were too. We just didn't realize it at the time.
Right.
We were sort of like really engaged with the characters, but we were also, it was sort of like being delivered in this like robot alien show.
Right.
And the fact that there were stakes when people died, they stayed dead.
Right.
It was heavily serialized. It was like the first real serialized thing that I had seen.
Sure.
And so for me, that sort of set a pace on me. I wanted to make things in that vein.
Right.
So all the, whenever I look back and I think about, I was really drawn to the X books. It's like, because it was a soap opera.
Right.
That's cool. Like, now I get it. Like, the spell totally worked on me in that kind of way.
Right. You couldn't wait for the next thing.
Couldn't wait for the next one.
Right. Yeah. Right. Okay. Well, awesome. So did you stick with storyboarding for a while?
I did, yeah. So I was storyboard when I first got in, became, storyboard artist. And then, in animation, that's probably the most like surefire path to being a director, because you, as a story artist, you're dealing with scripts, you're dealing with visuals, you're dealing with the design, you're taking all those elements and putting them together, and then you're thinking cinematically. You're putting all that stuff, you're lensing all that stuff and putting a perspective on it. When I was taking my storyboard class, the teacher, his name was Fergal Riley, he was working on, at the time he was working on the Iron Giant. And he showed us a rough cut of the Iron Giant. And again, that was the first time. I was so used to like Western animation. I was waiting for this sort of like musical number, and it just never showed up. Oh. And I was like, oh my God, like this is just a movie. This is like, this is not like a musical. This is not like this isn't for kids.
This isn't Disney.
This isn't Disney.
Right.
But it had, some of that DNA sprinkled in there. It was this beautiful amalgamation of all the things that I grew up with and loved. But he told us, on the first glance, to say, hey, the cool thing about storyboarding is that secretly you're the director of this thing.
Right.
You're the first at bat.
Right.
Like, really take a stab at what this thing is going to be shot like.
Sure.
And that really excited me.
Yeah.
So, yeah, it was a sort of natural progression. It was directing.
And so you worked on story on Iron Giant?
I did not. No.
Oh.
I was just watching his rough cut. He was working on it and teaching the class at night.
Gotcha.
So we had the benefit. I was watching. When the first time I saw Iron Giant, it was like probably still 40% storyboards and rough animation. There was no credits by the end. It didn't even have the part where the Iron Giant comes back together. He just goes up,
right,
blows up.
Gotcha.
Sacrifices himself, and I think the reel ended when Hogarth was like crying, and it was sort of a sad thing. I was bawling, and I was like, all right, I'm at least gonna have like the credits and the wrap up to like clean myself up. And he just turns the lights on. Everybody swoops around and looks at me, like, and I'm it was a really moving story, but I was also just like shocked to my core that it existed.
Yeah,
I couldn't believe it.
Yeah, so that's amazing. Yeah. That's amazing. So what was the next big project for you?
So I went from Sony. I worked on, I worked on Roughnecks. I worked on Max Steel. Do you ever hear of Max?
Yeah.
Steel? Yeah. I worked on. They did a series. I only helped out a little bit. It was a PC game called Heavy Gear, and they made a little show about that. And then I worked on an episode or two of Men in Black, the series, which was great.
Yeah.
That was the first time there was a director there named Mike Gogan who gave me the opportunity to storyboard. Up to that point, I was just doing revisions. And he said, hey, you look like you might be able to do it, so let me give you a shot on this. It worked.
Okay, great.
And then I had those samples, with me, and my friend said, hey, I think they're going to start, I think the Batman the Animated Series guys are going to start a Justice League show.
Okay.
We're hearing rumblings, and I didn't know, I still was sort of naive, but I didn't really know how to, approach another studio. Mm-hmm. So I just went to the front desk, and I said, hey, I've heard you are looking for storyboard artists for Justice League. And Thelma, the lady that worked at the front desk, she was like, okay, honey, I'll take that. Thank you.
Right.
And it got into the hands of James Tucker, who was working with Bruce Timm at the time. And they just come off of probably Batman the Animated Series. And I got a test.
Okay.
And so I did the test. I spent 2 weeks straight, just no sleep, no outside world, just doing the test to the best of my ability.
Right.
And I got a call when I turned it in, and James, I interviewed with James. He hired me. I got put on Dan Reba's team. Dan Reba was my director. And we did I started at the first season of Justice League, and that was when I got to meet Bruce, it was, for me, it was like meeting Walt Disney or something.
Yeah.
It was incredible.
Yeah. So around what year was this?
Early 2000.
Early 2000.
Yeah.
Gotcha. Yeah.
And then, the format of that show was, they were longer episodes.
Right.
And it was always a part 1 and a part 2. So it had that serialization.
Right.
And that was really exciting. That seemed like a big departure, but it also, again, was sort of playing into the thing that I loved about Robotech and about, it was a big serialized.
That's a great series too.
I really liked it.
Yeah.
It was, and that was where I learned probably a bit more, noir and sort of film story, that sort of stuff. And I think, it wasn't easy. It was, I think Bruce had a way more discerning eye, and James was always really supportive, and Dan was always really supportive, but Bruce was always like, it can be better. You can do better. How
did it affect your style? What was did your style change for that a little bit?
You know what actually happened? I got a hold of, they probably shouldn't do this, but they made the archives available to everybody.
Okay.
So you can just go and say episode 27 of Batman the Animated Series, can I see all the storyboards for that?
Wow.
I'll get you all the storyboards, and you can go and Xerox all those things.
Wow.
So I did that. I fell in love with all the episodes that were animated by TMS. Mm-hmm. And so I just went. And I basically I sort of adopted that style. I really liked the Japanese shorthand. And so
Gotcha.
I was a huge anime fan. So it was sort of the perfect hybrid of things. It was Batman the Animated Series, real Western sort of sensibilities.
Sure.
But then the shorthand and a lot of the storyboarding techniques and stuff were actually very Japanese. And it was for me, that was a perfect blend. That's sort of the style that I adopted.
Awesome. Oh, cool. So how long were you working on Batman?
I worked on it was Justice League, and then I went to Teen Titans.
Okay.
And that was great because, again, it was sort of oh man, they're really tapping into this funner expression of anime. And then I went on to Justice League Unlimited, where they sort of changed the format a little bit. They really blew it wide open. It wasn't just the big Justice League characters. It was everybody.
Sure.
And then after that, I went and that's where I started to work at Nickelodeon. My girlfriend at the time, I came home and she said, hey, this cartoon was all about this kid with an arrow on his head and it's martial arts stuff. I know you really like that. And it kind of looks like Japanese anime. It looks really good. So I watched one of the episodes and I was blown away. And I was also really sort of offended that I didn't know anybody in the credits list. And I know everybody in this space. I know all the action guys.
Sure.
Who are these people?
Yeah.
And they were, Mike and Brian, they, had come from Invader Zim and King of the Hill. And it was just a completely different sort of skill set that they were coming from. And I knew they were looking. I think Dave Filoni had maybe just left. This was sort of early season 2. and heard they were looking. And my buddy Mike Chang, the guy that got me into animation, had gone over there. He was storyboarding over there. So I said, hey, what the hell's going on? He said, are they looking? I called up, said, hey, I'd love to work for you guys.
Sure.
And they said, will you take a test? And I was like, well, I'm directing over here. Do I really need to take a test? In my head and start to inflate a little bit. And they were like, yeah, you kind of have to take a test. And I was like, but what if I don't take a test? They were like, then you don't get the job.
Right.
Give me the day test. I'll take the test.
Right.
Again, my wife was working in production. She had a gig going on in Vegas. I stayed in the hotel for the weekend, did the test, turned it in, met with them. They hired me, and again, it was sort of like, it was another aha moment where, I think with the Warner Brothers crew and the sort of Batman, the animated series crew, they were definitely sort of the generation above me. They were all the sort of adults that I looked up to and that I was really inspired by. But these were all people that were my exact same age, and we were all looking at the same stuff.
Right.
We were all really influenced by the same stuff. So we just immediately bonded.
And this is Last Airbender, I'm saying. Right. So what season did you start?
I came in a couple seasons into season 2.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And then I was storyboarding for an awesome director named Ethan Spalding at the time. Mm-hmm. And then third season, they said, hey, do you want to direct? Yes, I do.
Yeah, wow. Perfect.
Yeah. Then I directed through that and became really, really close with both Mike and Brian. They're a good, close personal friend to this day.
Right.
And I went back to Warner Brothers for a stint. I was developing up the Thundercats series that they eventually wound up doing. Mm-hmm. Literally the same day that Thundercats got greenlit, Mike and Brian called and said, hey, do you want to do this new show we're doing, Legend of Korra? Mm-hmm. I mean, it was like the Sophie's choice of all Sophie's choices. But I decided to go with Korra. And for me, I think it was the right decision. It was definitely a very hard decision to make because Thundercats was a huge point of inspiration for me. And I had been sort of like carrying that flag at Warner Brothers for many, many years. And I should redo Thundercats. And then, we did Legend of Korra. And again, it was sort of like just being with old friends, and hanging out and doing stuff. Serialized stuff. I realized that's with sort of this moral gray area. That was the other thing that is sort of understated about Robotech is that you empathize with essentially the bad guys.
Right.
You sort of see their point of view on things.
Yeah.
You guys turn and sort of become sympathetic to the humans' plight,
I think that's something we lack a little bit today. We want to make things black and white. We don't like the gray areas.
Yeah.
A little scary. But that's interesting to sort of think about that. So you were really, that story is almost the most important part of what you're thinking about when you're looking at these things, right?
I think so. I think it's, I've never, I'm sure I fall in love with certain sort of mustachio twirling bad guys for their charm, but that's never really been the thing that got me.
Right.
I'm always really interested, even if we're looking at Korra, like I really sympathize with, she had a adversary named Zahir, like his story was really heavy and sympathetic. And I was sort of like, I'm an Zahir guy. I don't know where I stand on this.
Right.
But I like that moral gray area.
Yeah, for sure. What was what were some of the things that were, how had you found your inspirations shifting at that point?
I think, for me, it was the older you get, the more experience you get,
right.
You start trusting your own instincts more and more.
Is it because of experience or is that because of maturity?
All of the above.
Okay.
Yeah,
right.
yeah. Early on, you sort of look to the things that really inspire you and you sort of do a version of that.
Right.
And that's really good and fulfilling, and it feels like I'm checking off all the geek boxes here.
Yeah.
Doing the thing. But then you start, especially when you're given sort of, when you're trusted with sort of a vision, and Mike and Brian were very giving like that. So they just sort of allowed us to do our thing. I became really close. Lauren Montgomery was my producing partner for years. Mm-hmm. She started as a story artist on Justice League, and we sort of followed our careers, we sort of like studio hopped with each other, and then we went to Airbender, and then she was at Warner Brothers. When I was at Warner Brothers, she was doing Wonder Woman, and I was doing these DC shorts. Or maybe she was doing, I've been doing Green Lantern, one of those.
Right.
And I think you sort of start surrounding yourself with people who are of like mind and sort of partnered up with Kihyun Ryu, who was an animator on Airbender, then moved to the States and became a director and story artist. And, you just sort of get your little personal community,
Sure.
And it's, for me, that's where I found inspiration. It was in other artists, and it was in their perspectives, and like, oh, look how they look at things.
Right.
So, yeah, I don't know that it's any... I'll definitely be inspired by films and stuff.
Sure.
But it's more about my personal human interactions, yeah.
Right. So where did you go? I mean, at this point, you've been doing a lot of animation, doing a lot of episodic.
Yes.
And traditional animation as well. So where did you go from there? How did this evolve?
Lauren and I rolled off of Legend of Korra, and then we both were producers on Voltron, which is like a remake of another property over at DreamWorks. We got picked up for like 78 episodes right off the bat, so that was like 4 years of our life, like
wow,
just chunked away. Somewhere in there, like it was early days on.
That was part of DreamWorks TV.
It was
okay.
That big push that they did right at the beginning with Netflix and stuff.
That was an amazing, huge jump that they did.
I mean, they went Boba Fett first, and the kitchen sink. And
that was amazing. Because I remember when they started, and Maya has actually been on the show before, and he's been a great partner of some of the work we do over at Chaos as well. But it was amazing at that. I remember overhearing people that they would hire like 36 people a week.
It was wild.
Yeah.
When I got hired, you go into those first like HR meetings.
Yeah.
It's like, okay,
and it's a huge crowd of people.
It is like a sports team. You're like, okay, well, we're here with an entire football team worth of people.
Yeah.
Crazy.
Yeah.
And that was every week. It was like, you'd see like, they had 3 elevators that would go up and down the building. And it was like all 3 elevators just unload into HR.
Right. Amazing.
It was very cool. It was neat.
There was a lot of inventive animations that were coming out of that thing.
So, yeah. And I think it was, people were just sort of like being trusted with stuff. Mark Taylor, who was running that division of DreamWorks at the time, he was over at Nickelodeon when Airbender was happening, when Korra was happening.
Sure.
He was really a huge supporter. So
that's awesome.
He was like, look, it's going to get ugly at times. It's going to get weird.
Right.
We'll figure it out. And he had a very, very level head.
Yeah.
And always supported us artistically.
Yeah, I remember because, my kids were young at the time, so we watched a lot of animation with them. But I remember even since like shows that I did not expect to be as fun and exciting. Like Turbo was like so cool.
Totally. And it's total, like,
and it was very North Hollywood too, which is also fun.
Yeah, that's funny. But yeah, so we were on that.
Voltron was you enjoyed your time on Voltron, right? Right. Yeah.
That was Lauren and I and Benjamin Kaltenecker, who was also on Korra with us, and he was my production manager on Justice League. We were like, when we had to do like the entire Green Lantern Corps, me and him were like middle of the night, like that's Tombar, that's Polacco, that's we had to like name everybody. It was still very analog on paper, so we would come up through the advent of digital and stuff, and we're working together, to this day.
Right.
But early days, I had done one freelance job for Tron, Tron Uprising.
Okay.
I'm a huge Tron. I mean, any like geek thing from there.
I worked on Tron Legacy, so.
Did you really?
Yeah.
I did the first episode, storyboard first episode.
Of the TV show.
Yeah. So how was Legacy?
Legacy was amazing. It was a lot of fun. I'd seen Joe Kaczynski sort of come, but he and I were both ex-architects.
Holy crap.
So we had, I'd seen what he had done in that area, and it was really cool to see him. And then there's your spider. I don't know if they'll see that in the video, but to see him sort of evolve and then sort of take that vision and just make it just very, very beautiful.
Dude, I was, one, couldn't believe that it was happening. That it was happening. And two, I had told Eric Coleman had gone from Nickelodeon over to Disney TV.
Yeah.
And he called me one day and said, like, hey, what are you doing? And I said, well, I'm working on some things. And he said, is there anything that, like, would get you going? And I said, I mean, if this was before I knew that Phil was even coming out.
Right.
If Disney ever does anything Tron related, just give me a call.
Sure.
I'll drop everything I'm doing. And then I saw it, and he was like, oh, that's really interesting. And he knew already at that point that the film,
Right.
I'm sure, was happening. And then...
And this was also by Chang, right? Wasn't it?
Mike Chang?
Yeah. Was
No. This was Charlie Bean ran Tron.
Okay.
Uprising. And then, he said, hey, so the movie, I think we're going to do a series. And I was like, oh my God, this is amazing. I was in the middle of stuff. He said, but we're talking to Charlie Bean. And I hadn't met Charlie Bean up to that point, but I had heard his name.
Sure.
He had an amazing reputation. But I said, look, I'm in the middle of hell right now.
Yep.
But just like, let me board one of the episodes. Let me just do one, like a light sequence or some sort of like maybe a disc sequence. And so I got a nice little opening disc sequence.
Oh, nice. Yeah. I worked on the light bike sequence. That was amazing. Which was beautiful. I did a lot of car commercials as well. So it was like a 9-minute beautiful car commercial.
Best shot car commercial.
Yeah, exactly. It was awesome. It was
incredible.
Yeah.
So cool.
Yeah. Okay. Well, so you got to work on Tron Uprising a little bit.
Tron Uprising a little bit.
I love the style of it too. It was such a great adaptation. It would need to be done, and it's a great show. Great show.
I mean, and all the people that worked on it. Charlie went on to direct Ninjago and Lady and the Tramp. He's doing all sorts of cool stuff now. Alberto Miogo.
Yeah, I know about you. Yeah.
Absolute killer. Robert Valley. I mean, we can't say enough about Robert Valley. Like, incredible. So yeah, what a creative force that show was. But I met Mike Moon, and at some point, Mike Moon made the transition from Disney over to Sony.
Right.
Both him and Charlie vouched for me, and he called me one day and said, hey, just take a meeting with Phil and Chris. I think I'm a Spider-Man thing.
Okay.
I just started this Voltron show. I can't do it. I said, just meet with them.
Okay.
You're not going to take the gig, I'm sure, but like meet with them and just have a chat because I think you guys will get on really well.
Okay.
So we met at a coffee shop. I was a total goober. I just geeked out on them and said, like, Lego movie's amazing, and you guys are the best, and you're so fun. It was a good meeting, though.
Sure.
And I think I left at least enough of an impression. And they had already hired Bob over the film, and it was
right.
But that was the first I had heard it was going to be a Miles Morales story. I had assumed we were sort of all, I don't want to say spider fatigue, but we'd seen a lot of Spider-Man up to that point.
Yes.
And I had worked on a Spider-Man show, and I was like, okay, I've got my head wrapped around what Spider-Man is. And I just assumed probably, I put the ass right in that one, was they were just going to follow more of that path. And when he said Miles Morales, I was like, that's interesting.
Yeah.
It seems cool. So we're working on Voltron. The trailer for the thing drops. And I mean, I think just like everybody else, my jaw hit the floor. I was like, oh man.
The style was so different.
Yeah.
And that influenced the story, and it influenced everything. It was very
even in the trailer, it felt like, oh man, this doesn't do a different thing. Mm-hmm. So cut to the end of Voltron, I get this random call on my phone from a number I do not recognize. And it's Christine Dawson from Sony. I'm just assuming it's a telemarketer or somebody.
Sure.
I don't know. I pick up the phone.
But she calls you directly.
She calls me directly, and she's like, hey, it's Christine Dawson from Sony Animation. I was like, hello. She goes, would you like to direct Spider-Man 2 or Spider-Verse 2?
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I went in for like a meeting with Phil and Chris, and we got on really well, and that was it. I think that was kind of...
Wow.
So I rolled off of Voltron right into Spider-Verse.
And you hadn't done a feature at this point?
No.
Okay.
Yeah. So, I came in at the tail end of them still posting on... They were still doing lighting and stuff on the first one.
Oh, wow.
And...
So it hadn't even barely gotten greenlit, if at all, right? Or they pretty much...
They knew they were going to do a second.
Right.
Yeah, they knew. So... I mean, it was greenlit, but there was still no story in place.
Sure.
But it was like, hey, just come in and let's start developing some ideas and see what could be. And they screened the first one from me. We're in like a little sweatbox. We're watching it. And then film ends. My eyes are melting and my brain is spinning and my heart's racing. And they turn around and they go like, okay, so like, what happens now? Should we just like take the governor off, really go crazy? That collider sequence at the end, I was like, I don't know. Right. I don't know what to do. I don't know. How do you get any crazier with this? And, you know, the sort of core idea that was sort of pitched at that early phase was, you know, if the first film is about these other spiders sort of invading Miles's place, what happens when Myles and Gwen sort of go out? And that was just really exciting. Right. That was really exciting. So, I mean, that was kind of it. That was, you know, the next 5 years of my life.
So how did you start that writing process? We're working with that.
They brought Dave Callahan on.
Yeah.
We got on really well.
Yep.
Sort of kindred spirits. And, you know, initially it wasn't the spot. It was, you know, it was a bunch of different things. Sure. But it quickly evolved into the spot being, you know, villain, having ties to Alchematics and you know, then it was really like, but what's the sort of core theme of this, and how do we evolve Myles and tell his story and tell a very relatable story, you know, even if you were to like take all the spider motif off.
Right.
The sort of story that we're all understanding from different perspectives, whether you're the kid in the equation, whether you're the parent in the equation, is that sort of pull away moment when a kid's sort of stepping into adulthood.
Right. Stepping
out of a nest. We've all been there. We all have to make that decision in our life and feel those feelings. And now I got an 8-year-old at home. Justin, my, you know, co-director, Kemp, they both have kids that are already out of the house.
Right.
And they were, while making Spider-Verse, were in the midst of going through it, experiencing it from the parents' perspective. So to me, that was like, we have all that supernatural, all that really cool Spider-Verse, fun, popcorny stuff.
Right.
And bubbling underneath that, and you've got, you know, these themes that are universally relatable.
Right.
And that, to me, that stew was really, really exciting. I think where, again, the film will take twists and turns and you'll find stuff through the process. But if you're holding on to those sort of tentpole areas, that's what we knew we had.
It's so interesting, you know, as becoming a parent, when you never picked up on it before you were a parent, but you look at old films and then suddenly like that parent thing comes up and you're like, oh, it's heavy
from the other side.
And it's so heavy. I know, it's so great.
You know, my wife, when I would, you know, a lot of the film was made during COVID, so I'm taking shots and watching cuts, and she comes in and saw the scene between Myles and his mom in Rio.
Right.
And she's just like,
which was the teaser.
It was a teaser.
Yeah.
And she was like, this is insane. She was like weeping at storyboards, you know?
Yeah.
So I think that's the power. I think that's the heart of that film.
That wasn't your first CG thing, was it?
I mean, I came in, technically Starship Troopers was a
right. That's true.
It was a crazy CG show that only, I mean, it was so funny. There were like so many limitations at the time. You couldn't watch a character like actually like physically pick up a gun. You could cut to the gun.
Right.
Then you could cut to the hands starting to come in. But before there was actual contact, then you need to cut wide and they got the gun in their hand and they're bringing it up because there's two different models.
Too complicated to do that.
It's too much interaction.
Yeah. So what's it like directing that? How's it different from the,
I mean, it's a huge difference.
Right.
There's a massive difference. There's a lot of skills that cross over really well.
Yep.
And there's a lot of fun to be had when you're dealing with these sort of pulpy comic book things that cross over really well. But one of the things that like really struck me was in TV, I had sort of built up this cadence of, okay, when we storyboard, we really lens and storyboard, and we're really thinking about what our shot progressions are and what, you sort of have to nail it your first or second time out because the show needs to ship and you need to be on to the next episode and you're spinning 3 episodes at the same time.
Right.
With feature boarding, it was more about capturing a gag or a moment or an emotional sort of resonance and not worrying as much about camera, because there's layout for that. And there's all these, and for me, unlearning a little bit of that was tough, because when I read the script, in my mind, I'm lensing it already, like it's happening.
Sure.
So I would sort of, work. I hired a bunch of story artists that I absolutely love, and I think come from TV a lot, and so their first instincts would sort of do that as well. And then, Phil and Chris would look at the boards and sort of go like, "These are great. We're gonna go in this other direction.
Right.
We're gonna change it." And I was like, "Wait a minute now. There's plenty of good work here."
Right.
And so it took me a minute to sort of be willing to just let go of ideas. Oftentimes they end up coming back into the fold.
Sure.
But it's way more exploratory, and it's way more sort of, it's a sort of speedier process, not because you need to get it out the door faster, but because you're trying to generate as many ideas as fast as possible.
Right. What about camera movement as well, though, right?
Yeah, but again, like I think with all that stuff in mind, so I was like, we're going to do this massive pan over here, and it's going to do a thing, and we're going to do a thing, and everybody was telling me like, layout will handle that. Like, just what are the beats? What are the
Right.
word? And for me, I mean, look, it's still not completely my cadence. It's just the way I direct.
Sure.
With camera in mind, and I'll go to my grave, I'm shortboarding the way that I board, and working with people the way that I work. But it was really interesting to sort of unlearn that thing that at that point into like 18 years of my life.
Right.
Doing it that way. And the other thing is, with TV, we show it to executives and we show it to the crew, obviously sees it and they weigh in on it. But there's no general, sometimes with certain shows, they'll do like a kids screening.
Sure.
But it's very sort of like, all those tests were usually sort of in concert with like a consumer products wing of it. Like, are these things that you would like to see on toy shelves? Those sort of like, those are the questions that were being asked. Do you think the character is really aspirational? Like, do you want to be this character? And it was always geared towards sort of the consumer product side of things.
How did that influence you?
I mean, I grew up with toys, so it was never a big deal for me.
Okay.
The thing that I didn't like growing up was I didn't like, let's say Batman the Animated Series. I loved Batman. I loved Robin. When I saw on the toy shelves that there was like an Ice Climber Batman and a Heat Wave Batman, those ones didn't interest me. I was like, it's not
Right.
It's not the story that I'm interested in. It's not in the show. So that always felt a little sort of shocked and gimmicky to me. I get that they need to move
Products.
Right. Do. But the test screenings and feature animation, it's purely story.
Right.
It's not really with a consumer. They have a division that does that.
Right.
But the audience screenings are just, are you engaged with this story, or these characters that you love, that resonate with you? And Phil and Chris, more than anybody that I've ever met, really, really pay attention to what the audience is saying.
Right.
Because they're building something that is specific, but also in equal parts, very broad emotionally. Whether you're, in Australia, or you're in Alaska, or you're in India, or you're in South Korea, wherever you're at, that story between a family resonates, and I think that those emotional tides resonate around the world. So they have the ability to get really specific, and really you can tell it's sort of Phil and Chris joint, when you're watching these films. They can sort of like do the thing like they did in the first one. They're literally waving around like, here is the MacGuffin, here is the MacGuffin, here is the MacGuffin.
Right.
Winking at the camera going, but they make you care about that.
Sure.
At the same time.
Right.
So, I think that to me was like a huge learning curve. It's just, I was very used to the romantic notion of like, well, it should be about the director's vision. And yes, and we also need this thing to play to families, and we need grandma to understand as much as we need the grandkids to understand.
Yeah.
So that I will forever hold on to that and take that with me to anything I
Sure.
forward. look, I mean, I'm happy to direct on something that is purely for me and like it's my own homage to They Live or, you know.
What would it be? What would it be the thing
Oh, man. My pie in the sky, like the thing that like, you know, aside from Tron, aside from Roughnecks up there.
Yeah.
But I fell in love. There was an era in the 90s where me and my friends would go to the liquor store every day and play Street Fighter.
Right.
Street Fighter for me was a real bonding experience, a really sort of special thing.
Interesting.
That would be one that I think I could really do cool stuff with. Yeah. I think there's, oddly enough, it's called Street Fighter. There would be plenty of fighting, and there would be plenty of fighting in the streets.
Sure.
I think there's actually a real emotional story to be told there.
Okay. Yeah, that's awesome. So I mean, having borrowed from the first one, I mean, you saw that first one and you had to sort of really embrace that style that, you know, was developed over that time. How was that? How was that for you?
It was weird, you know. The film came out, started getting all this like critical recognition.
Yep.
And then it sort of made its way up award season, winds up winning for an Oscar.
Right.
And I sort of went into like, holy crap, what did I get myself into here?
Right.
Because again, first time directing features, working with.
Had you spoken to Peter Ramsey at all?
I had, yeah. No, I had spoken to both him and Bob. I came in, you know, we've sort of discussed this in panels and stuff that we've put together, but like, I had a meeting with them at the recommendation of Kristen Bell. So she was like, just talk to those guys because they've been through the experience of making one of these things.
Right.
You know, they can sort of win on a lot of stuff. And I came in like a fresh-faced goober, and I was just like, hey, how's it going? I'm really excited to be here. And like, hey, man, chill out. Just know that this is a long haul. It's going to be extremely iterative. You're going to want to throw yourself out the window at times.
Sure.
You know, the highs, highs, the lows. And I was like, okay, it's going to be great. I just I couldn't quite see the forest in the trees just yet. You know,
Right.
I was so excited and nervous and, yeah, I think just more excited. And the process of making a film really is, I mean, it's a roller coaster.
Sure.
So they sort of were giving me a little bit of the like, hey, chill out just a little bit. Don't throw yourself at it like from the beginning because you're going to set yourself up for like extreme disappointments when things aren't working.
Right.
Just know that it's a real marathon.
Sure.
So, I mean, I learned over the course of making the thing that really is a marathon.
Right. And you're doing with COVID too.
Doing it through COVID. That was a wrinkle in time. For
Yeah.
Sure. Luckily, I will say that for the bits and pieces of the film, because we were still storyboarding a ton of stuff. It was a lot of like, we were still very much building what the film was in animatic form. But for the stuff that had already sort of gone over the fence and the tests that we were doing with ImageWorks, they're working relationship with ImageWorks because a large part of the studios in Vancouver, leads are here. They sort of worked in
Remote,
protocol.
yeah.
But they had that relationship.
They already had it. Yep.
That wasn't really an issue at all.
Right.
And I found, at least for me and the crew that we had in the pre-production sort of things, artists can kind of tuck away and be alone for long periods of time and just draw. Once it sort of broke a threshold, I think people who didn't have families or had moved from out of state and they started feeling really isolated, that's when it started getting tricky. That's when, like, for me, it was great. I got to spend more time with my kid.
Yeah.
I was with my wife. We were having dinner every night. She works in production as well.
Yeah.
So, like, we were sort of in that production life where we weren't home all the time. You know?
Right.
Now it was a complete opposite. So it was good for me personally.
I can see that. It's same for me.
Yeah.
I actually, I live in Burbank and drive to Culver City, and that was 2.5 hours of my life that I got back,
Right.
you know?
That's the way I kept looking at it.
Yeah, for sure. Well, it's kind of cool. I mean, I've just mentioned many, many times, but I mean, just the idea of, the Spider-Verse embracing comic books in such a great way. I think it sort of really revolutionized what comic book movies could be, right? As opposed to what, some of them have become a little bit stale in some cases. And this was so fresh and so wonderful. Well, and with your passion of storyboarding and comic books, how did that sort of resonate with you?
I mean, there was definitely kid in a candy store aspects to it. I think we're in like a weird golden age for animation where I think,
Sure.
They did such an amazing job with the first film, and it's sort of like, it's amazing. It's not amazing that it won an Academy Award, because it definitely deserved it.
Sure.
But it's amazing that a Spider-Man film and a comic book film had done that.
Right.
Because, they tend not to be recognized until more recent years.
Right.
So I think, I always say this, and I don't, it's not me blowing smoke. I think there was sort of like, in feature animation, there was the marker in the sand that was Toy Story. Mm-hmm. And that absolutely revolutionized everything and changed the game and made people, I think, a little less scared of computer generated, animation.
Right.
And then I think Spider-Verse did it as well. I think there was a before and after time with Spider-Verse, because I think what they did was they bent CG animation to their will.
Right.
And they made shadows didn't have to fall off and obey every light source and all the things. It was a real artistic expression.
Right. It dealt to a lot of exploration with a lot of different films. Like Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles and all that stuff was exploring that medium in a new way.
And Mitchell's,
Right.
It gave permission. And I think I think the fact that it was like critically recognized, commercially recognized, and those, to say it isn't a business, it's the movie business. Like, these things don't make money, then the trend probably won't. Now, you don't want to like spawn a bunch of copycats, but what you do want to do is have these things inspire other creatives to use their vision and see their vision through the screen. So I think that's what it did.
Yeah.
That's the real exciting thing. Yeah,
and that's really, really cool. So you're on to the next one too, or you're already almost.
We're we were sort of, it's definitely happening. And I think much like, when I ended up meeting with Bob and Peter on the first one, it was more about like, just finish what's in front of you.
Right.
And then worry about what's coming next. So right now we're definitely on the sort of like, we finished it.
Right.
Thank goodness that the sort of grand experiment was a success.
Yep.
So yeah, that's where we're at.
What are your thoughts about where it's all going from this point now? Like
the industry?
Yeah.
I mean, the industry, I think the sky's the limit. And I think, one of the things beyond spoilers, beyond just, spider films and turtles and these IP things, I think for animation in general, it plays to such a broad audience now. I've been sort of like waiting for the day, when me and my friends were watching different Japanese anime, we were like, it's enough for kids.
Right.
For kids. So I'm excited that the medium is being expressed in so many different ways and playing to so many different people, and so many different types of stories are being able to be told through animation. So I'm looking forward to that evolution and seeing where that continues to grow. Things like, for me, like series like Arcane, that blew my mind.
It's so great that it got me.
Oh man. I mean, really, I think for series work, that's the other thing that I said. Like, everybody in the industry goes like, well, they threw all the money in the world at it. I was like, well, look, that might be the case.
Sure.
But it happens. That box is opened and you can't close it back up again.
Right.
So,
but it also doesn't mean that you need to throw all the money at it.
Well, that's the other thing, is that like, there were so many things that were done beautifully in that film that weren't very expensive things. They were just beautifully executed things.
Right.
So, you know, I'm really looking forward to those trends continuing. And Arcane was playing not to kids, that's for sure.
Nope.
And
It had almost an Akira vibe.
it did. Yeah. The first time I saw Akira, I was watching an episode of Siskel and Ebert, and they covered Akira.
Oh, really? What was their take on it? I'm curious.
They were blown away.
Oh,
It was
yeah.
totally positive reviews.
Yeah.
I think it was more, you know, they were definitely speaking more to like the animation and the tone of it. But as a kid, when I watched that episode, it was the first time I had seen footage of Akira. I hadn't rented the tape yet.
Sure.
I didn't know anything. And I couldn't believe it. It was another sort of jaw-dropping moment.
Yeah.
I was like, wait a minute, this exists? And I just immediately went, oh, this is working.
Right. Yeah.
So yeah, it had that feeling. You know, when I was watching it, I was like, oh man, I'm getting that feeling.
They tried to remake Akira, and thank God it didn't get made, because I knew one of the guys who was going to direct it, and they tried to Hollywoodize it so much. Not going to work. What are your thoughts on story in general? Like, how has story evolved or not changed, or how do you wish it could be? Like, I think we're at a point now where we're starting to see very interesting things happening. So they're challenging the normality of what stories used to be. You know, things like Everything Everywhere All at Once is a perfect example of something that's like, this is something completely different. Even Spider-Verse, when it's a complete, it's not your standard Spider-Man film anymore.
It's not your standard Spider-Man film, and I also think that it breaks a lot of rules in terms of like, how do you open film? What's your what's your 3-act structure? It's like, it's not a traditional 3-act structure.
No, right? So yeah.
I mean,
Save the Cat may not be relevant.
It might not be relevant. I think, but I do, what I will say, again, sort of going back to sort of like the Lord Millerism of it all, is that emotionally it resonates, right? So the structure of it might feel like it's sort of non-traditional in all the right ways.
Right.
Like if you were to like academically break it down, it's like, well, they didn't follow these rules.
Sure.
But emotionally you're taking on this roller coaster. And I do think that there's a bit of that that's kind of permeating out with films like Everything Everywhere at Once. I think all the influences that the filmmakers of this generation had growing up, we weren't all looking at a limited sort of palette. We didn't have, there are obviously the great directors that we all should be studying and looking at and really understanding why those films worked. But we had access to weird stuff. We had access to Spike and Leg. We had access to MTV. We had access to all these things that entered our brains and affected us. We had the weird subversion of the Muppet Show that sort of like landed for us as kids as one thing, and then you watch it as an adult and you're like, hang on a second, there's whole other things happening.
Right.
You know, I think we're a product of the things that we took in.
Right.
And I think we had a way more global view of what cinema could be. We had access to foreign films at an earlier age.
Yep.
And I think that's only expanding now. I mean, the information is so available and accessible now. There's no time between a film being released that I see 15 artists online doing their homages to those things within like a day of the thing.
Sure.
Oh my gosh, it's
What do you fear? What do you fear?
I mean, I'm a little concerned that like kid isn't super into films. Like he isn't into narrative as much.
Yeah, no, my kids aren't.
Yeah.
One kid is.
Yeah.
One kid, but he's just an old man in the little body. My daughter, who's the older one, she's just not as interested in that kind of thing. I don't know what that means.
Yeah, I'm not seeing it as a bad thing. I'm just it's funny. He likes the new Grinch movie. I watched that.
Okay.
He loves old Peanuts episodes, which I'm totally fine with.
Sure.
I'm like, great, we can watch those together. And then beyond that, he's super into like tennis and soccer, and he loves watching like kids' highlights of tennis and soccer,
Sure.
and like he absolutely loves Minecraft, so
Right.
he likes
That's
watching
DH.
other people make
Play
Minecraft.
Sure.
And that to me is, I get it. Oh, one thing I have turned him
Well,
on to.
we watch other people play basketball, though.
We do. I think you got a hell of a point there. That's true. One thing I've turned him on to is we play old Nintendo games, right, which he finds like cool because they're challenging.
Sure.
But then there's a dude online that he covers like the history of speedrunning video games. So it's all about taking fractions of seconds off. Like games.
Yeah.
And he finds that endlessly fast.
It's like Super Mario Brother kind of stuff.
Like people beating it in like 5 minutes.
Right.
They shaved off a millisecond here by doing this jump through a brick here and doing this thing. That's really interesting. And that, I can geek out on it with them.
Sure. Well, that's very interesting. I think there's going to be some interesting ideas that are happening, and maybe those turns into stories that could be very cool as well.
I think I remember when Vine was a thing and people were creating content for Vine.
Yeah, 6-second videos.
And they were compelling some of them. I was like, man, they've figured out a way to make this format really work and entertaining.
Yeah. I think it's going to be cool for sure. Yeah. Well, listen, thank you so much. Where can people follow your stuff?
I'm on Instagram Premiere,
right?
Because that's more sort of art-based, and I can just drop pictures and look at really cool stuff.
Okay.
I don't really like to keep up with my Twitter or X or whatever it is now. I think that's about it.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, thanks so much for being on. Appreciate it. We will put all this stuff in the show notes, and it's been awesome having you on, and congratulations.
Thanks so much. Appreciate it.